of course, our pal. With the NCAA, the first 40 years, Bob does a great job, and obviously he knows the NBA better than anybody. I was going to lay off on this one because we have Bob on so much, Heinsohn, that I figured maybe I'd give him a little break and not have to use him on an old-time NBA player, but I couldn't resist after a great story that appeared in the Boston Globe about how Elgin changed the game. And Bob saw him plenty, so he can help us out here as we move it along. Bob, welcome. Nice to talk again, pal. How you doing today, okay?
Yes, sir. Very much so. Good, Chris.
58. You were old enough to probably get a little feel, did you? Which is, by the way, it's 57. By the way, to the date, 57-58 season. To the date is today, the championship game. Do you have any recollection of the Kentucky-Seattle game with Baylor playing on that Chieftain team? Any feel of that game at all?
No one saw it. It was not on television in any way nationally. I think it was 84-72 finals. Kentucky, Vernon Hatton was the best player on that team. It was the Fiddlin' Five. Anyway, Seattle was there for one reason, Elgin Baylor. He was one of my two boyhood idols, Elgin Baylor and Ted Kluszewski. Elgin Baylor, I discovered reading a February 1958 Sport magazine story by Emmett Watson, in which he started off by saying, "You're going to throw the magazine across the floor when you read this." And he started, and they said, "Elgin Baylor is the best basketball player in the world, amateur or professional." This is 1958, after his junior year at Seattle. And after so I got intrigued. And then when I finally got a chance to see him, I was hooked. And then, and I'm a basketball fan, and my premise, and I'm sticking with it, is that Elgin Baylor is the most influential person on the conduct of individual basketball in the last 60 years. Actually, more than that, 65. But 60 is a rounder number. Before Elgin Baylor, nobody did up and unders. Nobody did stutter steps. Nobody did funky shots from different release points. Nobody did reverse layups. And he was one of the great offensive rebounders of all time. We don't know how good, because in his day, the NBA did not keep offensive rebounding statistics, only rebounds. But he was an extraordinary offensive rebounder and as dangerous a man after he missed his own shot as has ever played the game. And I will state my credentials. I've seen every great player of the last 60 years at some point or another. And Elgin Baylor did that as well as anyone I've ever seen. But I do believe he influenced and changed the game. I think that basketball, you draw a line before Elgin and after Elgin.
Before Elgin, it was a horizontal game, and after Elgin, it was a vertical game?
It was a little bit vertical. It became very vertical, and then it became what I call diagonal. And everybody that has a game today takes things for granted because they learn how to play from their elders. And the dividing line on adding all kinds of offensive subtlety, all kinds of offensive moves, offensive pizzazz, if you will, is Elgin Baylor. Period.
All right, tell me about the first game he played at the Garden. I know you went back and looked at the stories back in November of '58 when Minneapolis played the Celtics, who were coming off. They only had won one championship at that point. They had lost the year before. Give me a little. So they had won one title. They weren't a dynasty yet. And Elgin comes in with Minneapolis. Tell him about that game.
He came in his first game in Boston. He had 35 points, 23 rebounds. And the Celtics were very, very, very impressed. The media was very impressed. He fouled out with a minute to go in overtime. They lost by 3. But he earned a standing ovation from the Boston Garden crowd in his first appearance in Boston. And, of course, it wasn't his best game in Boston. His best game in Boston came on April 14th, 1962, Game 5 of the finals in the 2-2 series at that point. And he only went for 61 points and 22 rebounds.
Yeah.
But Celtics came back and won Game 6 in L.A., and then a historic Game 7 when they won in overtime on the famous Frank Selvey missed shot, and Russell wound up with 30 points and 40 rebounds.
Wow.
Baylor never got to beat Russell in the finals, as you know. Baylor and West never beat him. West finally got a ring. But anyway, later on. But that first night in Boston, the coverage was, very, very gushing. And of course, as you saw the story, how about the subplot? The first game of that doubleheader. You remember?
Tell him. I sure do. Tell him, Bob.
It was a common practice. The NBA needed to get fans, and the best way, everybody wanted the Globetrotters to come in. And so this is one of the half a dozen times, or 3 or 4 times, the Globetrotters would be in Boston. In the first game of the doubleheader, the Globetrotters won naturally, but the story was Wilt Chamberlain had 50 points in the game, and there was tremendous coverage of that in the paper as well. Everybody gushing about Wilt Chamberlain. And for people who said, how could he be in the game? He left Kansas after his junior year to make money, and he couldn't go to the NBA yet because in those days you had to wait until your original entering class in college had spent 4 years. And he would have been a senior at Kansas that year rather, and that's the way it was. And so he played for the Globetrotters. But Elgin Baylor and Wilt Chamberlain each made their Boston Garden debuts on the same night.
Wow.
How about that?
How about that is right, man. If you didn't see Elgin play in college, nobody else did either. So the whole world was very curious who this Elgin Baylor was. Is that correct?
Absolutely. He played at Seattle U, and the glamour team out in the West Coast in those days had been USF, San Francisco, after Russell had left. Then Russell graduated and went to the NBA. UCLA hadn't started their reign yet. That wouldn't come until the next decade. There was no, coverage. No one. That's why when I read this story, Chris, I'm sitting here at home in New Jersey. I'm a 12-year-old kid at that time, and I'm reading this, and I'm like freaked out, like, wow, what is this? And it took me. Obviously, I didn't get to see him until he got to the NBA, and there were Saturday afternoon games, and you got to see him, and so I never got to see him in person until I got to Boston in 1964. But I can assure you that I never missed a Celtic-Laker game in Boston when I was in B.C. because I was making sure I was going to go to see Elgin.
Wow, Bob went to Boston College. Why underrated, Bob? West isn't underrated. We all know how great he was. Wilt, we all know how great he was. Baylor slips through the cracks. How come?
Yeah, I know. That's a good. Well, because we've got incarnations. His children, his progeny, his offspring, the people that flow from him are guys like A, Dr. J, B, Michael, particularly those two. And I'd say Kobe, because Kobe's the closest thing to Michael. I got to put him in there. And LeBron, but there's an asterisk with LeBron, because LeBron to me is a cross between Magic and Michael. And there's a lot of Magic in LeBron's game, obviously.
Yes, there is.
And led the league in assists. And a lot of Michael in his game, too. And so he's a cross. But ultimately, he descends from Elgin. They all do. Everyone does. Everybody playing basketball in the last 60 years descends from Elgin Baylor.
Why did L.A.? Now, he goes to L.A. after 2 years in Minneapolis. First off, 1 year. He only played the 1 year in Indianapolis. He goes to, I thought it was 2, 1 year in Indianapolis. He goes to L.A., and, West comes the same year he does, and it seems like West is the fans' adoration more so than Baylor. Is it because Baylor came from another city and West, grew up with, started his career? Why is that the case?
I don't think that was originally the case. I think as time went on, Jerry West became a beloved, sympathetic figure. I think I wasn't there. I don't know. Obviously, people are going to hear this and say, well, it must be racism. I think he was very popular in L.A. right from the beginning. I think that Chick Hearn, was there and did a lot he had Elgin putting people in the popcorn machine. He came up with stuff to describe Elgin. I'm not so sure that's true, Chris. I don't really think so. I think as time went on, West got to be more beloved, and he was still playing at a very high level when Elgin retired due to injury. You realize Elgin only played 11 games in his last 2 seasons.
Yeah, I know that.
9 in 70-71, 2 in 70-71, and 1 in 71-70, 9 in 71-72. And, of course, the sad part of the story for his playing career is that he was forced to retire in December of 1972. And that night, when he was replaced in the starting lineup by Jim McMillan, the Lakers started their 33-game winning streak.
Yeah, they were 6-3, and they won 33 in a row. No question. How about Baylor pre- and post-knee injuries?
Not the same. He lost a lot of his stuff. And then still, he goes from being able to put up 30 a game to putting up 24, And, look at just have people go study the numbers. And, of course, we can't exit this discussion without discussing his incredible 1961-62 season when he only played 48 games. Why? Because he got drafted. He got conscripted into the Army as a reservist. He got conscripted. He didn't have to go because there wasn't a war officially for us to fight. He went up as a reservist out of Fort Lewis, Washington, playing on weekends with leaves, and he's played 48 games out of a 72. he averaged 38 points a game without being able to practice. I'll repeat that. The man averaged 38 points a game at the highest level of basketball in the world while an Army reservist.
And he played all 18 games in the postseason and had the 61 and the 22 in Game 5. I guess
he was given a leave. They gave him a leave.
Got to leave. I guess outside of Jordan's game 2 against the Celtics, it's the greatest individual performance by an opponent in that building?
I think so. I think you can make that strong case. You asked me a question a couple minutes ago, but why? History, some people just don't get treated properly. Michael came along at a point when communication had changed entirely. ESPN was here. He's a product of a communication age that is more intense than the one Elgin played in. That's part of it. Dr. J had that that aura and that cachet of the dunking and all. And he had his own game, and he post-dated Elgin. I mean, Dr. J was in college when Elgin retired, but I don't know. But I'm doing everything I can to correct this misconception and restore his proper place, and recommend to you, to anybody that's listening that cares about this topic, there's a wonderful book about Elgin Baylor, a biography called Elgin Baylor, The Man Who Changed Basketball by Bijan Bain. That's Bijanbayne. And yes, I wrote the foreword. So, but I won't profit from this, folks. I'm just telling you now. I won't profit from this except the gratification and the satisfaction if anyone reads it and then understands the greatness of Elgin Baylor.
How about the rivalry with Wilt? They're fighting for scoring championships in the early 60s, and then they didn't see, I had Gail Goodrich on today. He said there was some friction because they both liked the left side of the court, and they sort of got in each other's way, which made sense. And here comes Jimmy McMillan. They win 33 in a row and have one of the great teams ever. How about the Baylor-Wilt relationship? Let's go through that.
Yeah, well, I think that was as much, too, and Gail Goodrich has a technical explanation, and he knows damn well, too. You're talking about two alpha dogs. Was the team leader, not Jerry. Jerry was the little brother to Elgin in terms of team leadership when they were in their peak. Elgin liked being viewed as the leader. Elgin was the man, who people look to for everything and social activity, everything else. Wilt was not a shrinking violet. Wilt came. I'm Wilt Chamberlain, and he assumed that he was going to step in and be that guy. I think that was where that problem lay. Two alpha dogs battling for his supremacy. Was he well coached as a Laker? Yeah, Fred Schaus. There's no reason. Good coach? Was he a good coach, Bob, Fred Schaus? Oh, was he a good coach? No, he wasn't a good coach, and he was a worse general manager. Too many people are going to recognize Elgin Baylor. Oh, the guy was a 22-year GM at the Clippers when they were the worst team in basketball, which, in fact, they were. You want to talk about Elgin post-career? And by the way, let's start with this. He's a wonderful man and a civil rights activist and a leader and a fine man. But it's amazing that he held a job for 22 years as a GM. And then it ended. I couldn't understand this, Chris. I always figured that Donald Sterling just loved Elgin Baylor and stuck up for him even when he should have realized he wasn't a good GM. And then in the end, he fired him. And then Elgin turned around and sued him for ageism and racial discrimination. And lost. That was not a good moment for Elgin Baylor, I'm afraid. Yeah, I mean, they're there for 22 years, and you didn't win a lot. It's going to be hard to win that case. Am I right or wrong? I'm not making Sterling out to be. That's why the judge decided, hey, you got fired because you didn't, your team stunk. So there's a distinct, difference between his post-career basketball achievements and his on-court achievements. But his legacy is seen. You want to turn on the TV for the Sweet 16? All these kids don't know it, but everything they know about how to play the game, or a lot of what they know, it's been passed on to them, and it all started with Elgin Baylor. Interesting. Now, if Selby makes that shot in Game 7, I'm sure you saw that game. If Selby makes that shot in Game 7, does that change the narration of the Lakers and Celtics scenario for both Baylor and West forever? We can always speculate on things like that, and we're never 100% sure. But I think yes, I'd say yes. And there's so many examples of like that in history, but that's one of them. I think they come back with a swagger the next year. I think come back with a purpose. And yes, I think that might have done a lot to change Laker history.
Wow.
And NBA history.
And NBA history. All right, tell me quickly on Cousy and Russell about Elgin. I read the quotes from Cousy, still alive, and
Yes.
he loved Elgin. It was interesting quotes from him. Let me hear. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, Kuz said, the first night they played against him, he said, he certainly got my attention, he said. But he got to know Elgin afterward when they worked for the Jansen people and that promotion. And he said he played a lot of tennis with Elgin, and he got to know Elgin over the years, and he really thought he was a wonderful guy. He was very proud of, being a friend of Elgin Baylor. He just loved him as a person.
And Russell?
Russell respected the hell out of Elgin. How could he not? And he did. And I guess I've seen a tweet from Bill, and a respected opponent. I mean, how could you not respect a guy that just dumped 61 and 22 on your ass?
Yeah. And did you read the Heinsohn quote in the obit in the Times today? Did you read that?
Yeah, I did. And Tommy had to guard him at times. Although once Satch came around, Satch got stuck guarding him. But Tommy would have had to guard him first couple of years, and he knows what a handful he was. I mean.
And how about Sharman? Did you read Sharman's quote today?
Yeah,
Elgin
what was Sharman?
Baylor,
Refresh me on Sharman. I forget exactly.
He told the LA Times, I guess when he retired, Elgin Baylor is the greatest corner man who ever played pro basketball.
Well, he certainly was when he retired, and now you're in the discussion of great forwards. Of course, LeBron is such a hybrid; he's now transcending position. But Larry, of course, you start with Larry as pure forward. LeBron is a hybrid, but then you got hybrid, and then you got to go Elgin. You got to go Elgin.
You take him over. You take him over.
Durant's going to be in that discussion in the final. When he retires. But when it comes to you got to have Elgin up there. If you got to take Elgin or Dr. J, you take Elgin.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Would you take Elgin over Bob Pettit?
Oh yeah, he could do more than Pettit, and he could. Pettit was an excellent player at the time. Pettit was like the end of the old guard. Pettit was as good as you could be playing that way. You know what I mean?
Yes.
He was a great mechanical, monotonous turnaround jump shooter. And a powerful guy to go to the basket, and a good offensive rebounder. Not as good as Elgin, because Elgin was the best of his time. But yeah, but Pettit was a conventional player. It's like people, and let me just throw this one in there. People said, "What about Oscar?" The difference between Oscar and Elgin was that Oscar was the greatest, was the most orthodox player imaginable. Oscar did it by the book. Oscar was classical music. Elgin was a jazz improvisation. Elgin, Oscar did everything by the book. Elgin wrote a new book.
Good job, Bob. Great story. Good to talk to you again. Stay healthy. Thanks very much, pal. I appreciate it.